The Amazon Getting Started Guide with EKS has a section where it uses the ECS control tool to show you a really kind of quick start guide on how to create ECS cluster, test that's working, and then delete it. And here, basically, you can see right here, EKS create cluster, and then you can see cube control get nodes just to verify that the cluster is up and running. Then you delete the cluster at the end. So this is really meant for it to be a quick start, and it's a good quick start. But it really only scratches and barely scratches the surface of what this EKS control tool can actually do. To find more information on the EKS control tool, you actually go to its official documentation site right here. And I actually really recommend you going here and actually checking out. I spent an afternoon just reading through basically all the pages here just to get a feel for what it can do. And this tool is actually quite powerful. So here you can see that you can actually just call EKS control create cluster by itself, and that's enough to actually create a cluster. So you don't even have to even specify the cluster name. If you don't specify the cluster name, it basically generates a random name for you, and then it launches some CloudFormation stacks in order to create the cluster. Really good documentation pages under clusters right here, and then creating and managing clusters. This shows you can create cluster, but kind of more importantly, you can create cluster with the YAML file here, so YAML file. And the YAML file structure follows kind of like a Kubernetes kind of structure here, where there's API version, a kind, and metadata. So that's very kind of Kubernetes-ish, I guess. So you like kind of thinking those terms, and the tool is kind of designed in those terms. So I like how that kind of goes with the flow there. And here it's just showing you how you can actually specify your node groups here, and then you have the node groups kind of spin up. So that's pretty neat. And then in order to use the cluster file, you just specify -f and then the path to the file right there. You can even specify existing VPCs by basically configuring VPC subnets here and the private clusters and private subnets and all that. So a lot of power here. This is another useful documentation link right here, even though it's non-eksctl created clusters. The reason I thought this page was useful, it kind of gives you a nice list of some of the commands available. So here are all the create commands, and you see the create command, you can create not just clusters, but also node groups. So you create node groups and associate them with clusters, that's really neat. You can also create the Fargate profile if you need to do that, or IMA service accounts, like that's actually really IMA role. There are a bunch of git commands too, where you can get information about the cluster and node groups, labels. Here are the kind of corresponding delete commands with the resources you want to kind of delete. Here's an upgrade command, so you can actually upgrade the cluster. You can only do one patch version at a time, okay? So, but you can upgrade the cluster, so that's pretty neat too. You can set labels and unset labels. Here's how you scale the node group, so if you want more capacity there. Drain is basically cordoning the node group or the instances that belong to the node group. And then there's this enable profile that's actually really kind of deprecated, but there's a bunch of utils command also, so kind of miscellaneous commands right here, right kubeconfig, that's useful. And here are the three update commands here, core DNS, AWS node, and kubeproxy. Those are the three core add-ons that come ship with the EKS cluster. So you can actually update those add-ons here just by this one command, which is pretty nice, I think. So one of the things when I was looking at this documentation, and I saw that, okay, you could basically provision EKS cluster with some code here, a YAML file here. So I was wondering, okay, what's available, the fields available? Well, it's all right here under basically config file schema. So if you click on that, you can see all the fields that are kind of available with the cluster. And the good thing about this is you actually run this if you have the tool installed. You can run it and maybe pipe it to JQ, and then you can see actually all the fields kind of color coded there. So there are lots of fields that you can kind of configure here, but it's also here available on the official docs here. I'm guessing they just generate that. Okay, so that was pretty nice. But sometimes, reference information is a little overwhelming. I just want working examples. So guess what? Here's the examples link. So that's also very useful. This examples link, it just takes you to the GitHub repository. And the GitHub repository has a folder with examples. So you see all sorts of examples here. Like here's the SSH key, here's spot instances, which is really neat. Here's NAT gateways. On the default cluster that gets created, it does create some private subnets with the NAT gateway, but only creates one NAT gateway. So it's not highly available. However, I can see why they chose that as the default, because each NAT gateway costs about $72 a month. So if you're spinning up 3 NAT gateways, you're looking at $216 just for NAT gateways there, okay? So that's probably why they made that, they made that balanced trade-off decision. But you want high availability. Like you can actually just configure it right here, and then you'll have high availability private NATs right there. Spot instances right here is pretty easy. You can use instant distribution if you're using these type of node groups. Okay, SSH keys. Let's say you want to be able to SSH into these instances here. Then you just specify a public path here, or just actually the public key, the contents here. So I just showing you some examples here, Fargate profile, but there's plenty of examples here combined with this basic config file schema right here. It should give you kind of the necessary knowledge in order to figure out how to configure that config file. Okay, I did want to look at node groups here also here. So let's say you could actually spin up separate node groups and then associate with the cluster. So let's say you could spin up additional groups and then basically throw a couple pods, kind of like, you know, some testing pods over to that node group, and then see if everything's kind of working. And to do that, you can actually specify a config file also, but there's also this include option and exclude option. So this config file, let's say you have a bunch of node groups, because you actually specify array in there, you can actually say include only these basically node groups that I want you to provision right now, or exclude this, and basically would filter it out, would select it or reject it out. So that's pretty neat that you can kind of do that. And then I also want to show you spot support here. I showed you an example already, but here's kind of where you can also specify spot here. And here they're actually specifying manage node group here, which is nice. Now I do want to point out, when you're using this config file, this is called manage node group. When you're using the CLI, it's called node group, and then you go and then that's managed by default, or manage is equals false. So you basically specify as another flag. Okay, so it's likely that they did it this way, just keep backwards compatibility. But manage node groups is for manage node groups, and regular node groups is node groups. Okay. So as you can see, this tool is a lot more powerful than what the quick start makes out to be. Okay, you could basically use it as kind of a way to not just build clusters, but also manage clusters. I would say currently this tool, I like it. It is a little bit iterative or procedural, however you want to think about it, in the sense that you will run the command step by step. Like, okay, you create a cluster, then you want to upgrade the cluster, then you run the upgrade, but then you want to apply and create a new cluster. Basically, it will kind of try to update the CloudFormation stack in the background, and sometimes that can work, sometimes that doesn't work. But some of the commands are more kind of like you have to run it step by step. They are kind of working on making this a little more decorative, where you just give it the YAML files, and then it's just going to run it, and then hopefully resolve and remediate all the differences. But we'll see. But in any case, very, very powerful tool. And I thought just reviewing some of this documentation, kind of giving you an overview of everything, will be very, very helpful. So hopefully that was helpful. Cheers.